Thank you everyone for hopping on the call today. There's a good amount of people on, so we can go ahead and get started. I just want to thank everyone for joining today. I know this is finals week and y'all are busy, so thanks for taking the time out today to learn about the census. Let's see, so just to give a brief overview, we'll just be giving an update about the state of the census, what's going on in Texas specifically, just give an overview and a snapshot of the efforts that have been done and the work that we have coming up ahead. And then I'll just go into kind of like the bulk of census information, so ways people can respond, the census questions themselves and things like that. And then near the middle, we'll have a Q&A with two Census Bureau specialists. So if we could pull up the PowerPoint right now, that would be super great. Next slide, please. Yeah, so like I said, we're just gonna go ahead and do a Census 101, talk about the state, why it matters to make sure that our communities are filling the census out, what the Census Bureau considers hard to reach communities, like which populations in our society are they talking about. Then we'll go ahead and talk about ways to respond, confidentiality, give a brief timeline, and then again, we'll hop into the Q&A section. If you have any questions along the way, or if you have any questions that you kind of want to ask the Census Bureau experts that are specifically, they work with higher ed, you can go ahead and pop those in the chat and then I'll read those off for them. So what is a census? Very basic definition. It's a head count that the founding fathers made sure was in the Constitution, that occurs every 10 years with the goal of counting every single person living in the country, regardless of their background. So it doesn't matter your citizenship status, it doesn't matter your race, ethnicity, class, everyone is counted in this census. Next slide, please. So we do hear that definition, the census is a head count, but we wanna make sure that people know that the census is the head count is the first step, right? So it's like, okay, once we count folks, what happens to that head count? Why does it matter? For two major reasons, actually. So one is fair representation. So the census count that'll come at the end of the year is used to determine how many representatives we have in Congress, on top of how voting districts are drawn. So when we think about gerrymandering, which is super horrible in a lot of the regions that we work in and we live in, this information on the census and on the amount of people that fill out the census, it greatly affects the representation that we have and making sure that it's fair and equitable for all folks and communities. And the second reason why the census is so important is because, of course, money, always money. It determines how much money flows into our communities. So when we think of students, Pell Grants, FAFSA, any other type of scholarships, bilingual services for international students, like the list goes on. Libraries, we think of and research that goes into the environmental impact of chemical spills and leaks and explosions, things of those nature. When we think about this pandemic right now, emergency health services, how many ventilators people can have, the capacity that nurses and doctors have in the hospitals, the resources they have to even fight this pandemic. All of those things are affected by the census. So governments and hospitals actually take old census data from like 2010 to inform how much, or to kind of like to estimate how many resources they'll need to fight things like, for instance, this pandemic. So when we think about how important it is, they're taking not only just old data, right? Because 2020 census hasn't happened yet, it's not complete, it's going on. So they take that 2010 census data, but that data is still just a portion of how many people were counted. So imagine how many folks weren't counted in the 2020 data and the 2010 data, and yet that data is being used to try to help emergency services. And so that's why we're seeing that's one reason why we're seeing such a lag in responses and just a clear and immediate plan of action. And so there's a lot of research, there's a lot of data out there that says on average, each person, they give it about $2,000 to $3,000 in their community when they're counted. So if you're thinking about one person, $2,000 in the span of 10 years, that's already a lot. But think of how many people in our communities are not being counted. And you can kind of start to build a picture of exactly how detrimental it is that our communities are getting counted, so we can have the resources and we can have pretty much the resources for like whatever our community needs. Next slide, please. So I kind of gave you a little bit about how the census affects you in these ways. There's some other ways, like highway funding, of course, Medicare, SNAP, food programs for students in high school and middle school and elementary, special ed grants. When it comes to affordable housing, the census count, it also affects how much affordable housing can be in one area. So when we talk about gentrification, again, that also plays a factor. Next slide. So, of course, because we live in this great state of Texas, we don't have a plan. So elected officials have opted not to fund or create a long-term plan of how we will be making sure that we have a fair and complete count of our citizens or our residents in this state. So most of the efforts have been pretty much just handled by certain municipal entities, have been really spearheaded by nonprofits and progressive organizations, some foundations here in Texas, and they've gotten together and they tried to push these words out. They've hired more organizers to really get the word out and work with their respective communities to make sure that people not just know that the census is happening, but they can answer it and empower themselves to do so in the best way that works for them. Next slide, please. So just to give a little snapshot about the state of the census, we can see here that a little over half of the country has already filled out, has already self-responded, which just means that, again, people have responded to the census by phone, mail, or online. And so that's 56. So Texas stands at 51%, which is good. It's not the best, but we can get better. And then if you go to the next slide, we can see specifically Texas ranks 39th of all the 50 states. And so again, to not have the support of our elected officials at the top, this is a really good ranking. But again, we know that we can do better, and we know that we can capture more people because that's what we deserve. And so again, we see on the right that there are about like 6 million households that have been counted, but we need about half more of those to be counted. Next slide. And then if we break it down by county, and we could really start to see by color exactly how these efforts right now are looking, we can see that the darker, according to this map, the darker the spot, so when you see dark orange, those are the areas that are like detrimentally undercounted right now. So 15 to 30% or less of the residents have filled out the census. Parts that are blue means they're doing fairly well, means they have at least 50% of their residents counted. But again, we want to make sure that Texas turns blue, and not just blue, but darker blue, right? We want to make sure that as many people in this state count as possible. So earlier I alluded to hard to reach communities. A lot of us that are on this call today belong to multiple of these groups, including myself. And so the Census Bureau has given us a list of hard to reach, hard to count, or I would say historically undercounted populations in this country. And they include people of color, folks in Texas rising demographic, 18 to 24-year-olds, renters, children, LGBTQ folks, folks who are low income or homeless, non-English speakers, or people who have low English proficiency, and then immigrant community. Next slide, please. So we know that because we are working with hard to count communities who have been historically undercounted, we know that there's a lot of distrust in the government, and we know that there is a lot of apprehension to giving personal information. And so we really want to make sure that when we talk about people completing the census, that they know that they do have protections when it comes to their privacy. So Title 13 of the US Code, it pretty much just states that the information that's gathered from the census can't be used against respondents, right? And it can't be sent between different government agencies. So that means your information won't be going to ICE, won't be going to law enforcement, and it won't be going to your landlords. Like, those are a few examples. So the Census Bureau collects information from agencies, but they are not allowed to give information to these agencies. The information that's collected from the census occurs or will be released every 72 years, which means the information from this census won't be released until 2092. And then staff, if they were to ever violate any information, if they were to ever send your information out for whatever reason, they would get fined $250,000. Next slide, please. So there are currently 3 ways to respond, which is pretty great. It gives people variety. It does take into account a lot of different access points and access levels for folks. This year is the first year that they're having the census online, so I think that's pretty exciting. So when you fill out the census online, you'll have a unique ID code that the census will give you and it'll pretty much take you to the website. So it is my2020census.gov. And you don't have to have your unique ID that comes in the mail. So let's say you never got, for whatever reason, you never received your mail, or you might have moved, or you just thought it was like spam. You can just go online. It'll ask you to put in your address, and then you can start your survey. So if you don't have your ID, don't worry, you can still fill out the census. And that form is available in 12 non-English languages. You can just press the button on the top right, and it'll show you a list of languages. So for the mail version, the paper form version, it's available in only English and Spanish. English is the blue side, and then if you turn it over, Spanish will be in green. And there's a third option, the phone option. Folks in our demographic don't tend to use the phone option. They prefer online or honestly online, but you can mail in. But there are folks who still want assistance and want support in filling it out, and they can do so using the hotline that the census provides. And that's also offered in English and 12 non-English languages. Next slide, please. So how many questions are on this census? 9, actually. It's very short, it's very simple, but we want to make sure that our communities understand what's on there ahead of time so they can be prepared. So the last 5 questions, or the last couple questions, are about very basic demographic information. So your name, sex, age, race, Hispanic origin, people living in place, and then the first 4 questions are about your place of residence. So is it a mobile home? Do you live in an actual home and a rented apartment? They'll ask for the amount of people that are living in that household. And a household isn't just the people that you're related to. It also just includes if you're roommates, just anyone living in that actual household is who counts. And then they'll ask for your phone number in case there's any discrepancy, or maybe you have submitted 2 census and or two surveys, and maybe there's some discrepancy information on there. They'll call you to confirm or to clear up that information, but the chances of them calling are pretty slim. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the first questions is they'll ask you the number of people living in that household. So right off the bat, you want to include like any single person, again, like I said, not just family members. So if you do that accurately for number 2, you're always going to put no additional people. And so for question number 3, again, you'll just say whether you own or rent that place, and then you provide your phone number. Next slide. So for the questions following, you'll have your first and last name. And this is your government name that they've given you, no nicknames. They will ask you for your sex, and unfortunately it's not expansive. They don't have more options, so you can only do male or female. I would recommend folks choose the one that's most comfortable, for whatever that's worth, unfortunately. When it comes to age, we want to make sure that when make sure you write years in the left portion. Some people and accidentally put like, oh, I'm 22 years old in the month section. So making sure that you read that carefully and you're putting the number in the correct spot. Let's see. And then, is this person of Latino, Latin, or Spanish origin? You can mark one box. So technically you can do whatever you want, but I would suggest marking one box, because if you choose 2 or more, the Census Bureau will pick one for you, and they'll do it based on maybe where you're located. So like if they see, okay, you live in a high percentage of folks who are from El Salvador, they might mark you in that way. So you just want to make sure that like you are choosing the box that best fits your identity. Next slide, please. Okay, now we have the race question. So this question, I think we all know, is completely, it's a mess, just gonna be honest. So I'll break it down a little bit. So for the white portion, if you identify as white, you have the option of checking that off. And if you want to be more specific, you can go ahead and write in your ethnicity or your race, technically. So this category does include people who are Middle Eastern or North African, even though the MENA group has been fighting to have their own category on the census. It's not been approved yet, but they are still fighting to have a separate category for themselves. Next, for folks who are Black or African American, they can go ahead and check off that box. And then if they want to be more specific, they can go ahead and fill out, okay, I'm Nigerian, I'm Ethiopian, things of that nature. For the next category, folks who are American Indian or Alaska Native can mark that box and put in their tribal affiliation. And then for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, they have a robust amount of options to choose from. But if you still don't see the community that you identify with, you can go ahead and write that in. And then some other race, I would avoid that as much as possible, just because we're not really sure how the Census Bureau is counting that information. I've heard conflicting reports that it's going to be they're just going to group it as like some other category in general. And then I've heard other reports from trusted organizations that say that it's not going to count at all. So as irritating as it is to not see a group that you identify with, I would choose a box other than some other category, unless you just really feel compelled to fill that part in. Then when it comes to filling out the answers for if you live with more than one person, so if it's more than one person or more than just you living in that household, like let's say a roommate, it'll start to go into the person 2 category. And it'll ask you, does this person usually live or stay somewhere else? And you want to say no. Just to make it clear, make sure there's no duplicates. You're going to want to say no, you live in that household. So for instance, if there's students that like for the summers, they go live with their parents, like we're counting, the Census Bureau counts it as where do you live and stay most of the time. So if you live in your college city, or if you live in the student dorms, most of the time of the year, then you're going to put no, essentially, because you don't live or stay anywhere else. And then for the next question, for folks, again, if you have other people you're living with, there's a robust amount of options that you can fill out to kind of categorize who these people are that are in your household. Next slide, please. So what is not on the census? This relates to, I just wanted to give this slide to kind of, again, dispel the mistrust that a lot of folks have when it comes to filling out and giving personal information. So we want to really emphasize that the citizenship question will not be on the census. It is not on the census. The census will also never ask you for any income or bank account info. But I do want to caveat that the Census Bureau does conduct hundreds of other tests throughout the years that might ask more in-depth questions. But when it comes to the 2020 census, the census that happens every 10 years, that will never ask you for any financial information. Your social security or your driver's license won't be on the census, and anything regarding to political party. And the reason I put that is because there have been some Facebook ads and some mailers that have been sent out by conservative groups that have asked for donations and that have made it look like they've used the Census Bureau logo to make it look like the Census Bureau was asking these questions, but in reality, they were asking for money for their fundraisers and things like that. So again, making sure like the census is non-partisan, and so they shouldn't be asking any political information from you. Next slide, please. Okay, so this timeline. So because of COVID, this timeline looks significantly different. So Census Day, of course, is April 1st, and mailers were sent out March 12th through the 20th, round one of the mailers. We want to go, so for April 2nd, group quarters, they're going to start counting students living in dorms, or they did start counting them. Because of COVID, that process is going to end October 3rd. If you go to the next slide. Let's see. So for June 13th, census workers are going to drop off invitations in paper forms. Again, just to be clear, this timeline could change depending on recommendations for social distancing, but as of now, this is the timeline that stands. For August 11th, census takers are going to start interviewing people in neighborhoods. That means going into the neighborhoods and like asking folks who haven't filled out the census to fill it out. And that ends October 31st. And then April 30th of next year and July 31st of next year are when the counts, Congress is currently looking to approve of whether or not these dates are going to be the final dates where the census information is going to be released that determines how many representatives we have, how voting districts are redrawn, and how much money is going to be allocated to Texas. We want to make sure, if you look at August 11th, right, to October 31st, when census takers are going to start coming into the communities, this is why a lot of folks are apprehensive about this. And so we want to make sure to empower people and to remind people to fill out the census often, or not often, to fill it out early, and to really make sure that they have the resources necessary to do so, so that they won't ever have to come in contact with a census taker. So we want to make sure, because of COVID, people who might have health issues, who might be worried about interacting with census takers, they can go ahead and do all of this, complete all of this, without ever having to come in contact with someone from the Census Bureau. Next slide. Yeah, so the census is a social justice issue. And I really hope that this presentation really shows exactly like the impact that the census has, and it really shows why we need to work towards hiring the count in Texas, because again, based on the lack of help that we received from our officials, we're at a good spot, but we can always have room for improvement. We can do better. And I believe that, especially when it comes to young people and the energy that we have, and especially at a time where people are online more than they ever have been in recent years, or in the recent year, that we can really tap in to the collective power that we have and really educate folks who don't even know what the census is. So if you just want any more information, you can always email me at lisa@tfn.org. But we'll be sending out a list of resources and volunteer opportunities for anyone who's on the call today. And that is it for my presentation. Let me see. Okay, so I have two folks from the Census Bureau, the two specialists here. We'll go ahead, again, if you have any questions, we'll go ahead and drop them in the chat so I can go ahead and read them off. But I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves and just kind of show you all the state of the census and the things that are happening in regards to census, students, and higher education. So we have Brianna Drisdale, and then we also have Sam Patton. Take it away,
Hi,
y'all.
everyone. That was an awesome presentation. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm Brianna Drisdale. I work with Sam and we tackle higher ed. Just want to piggyback everything that you said. It was so awesome. Young people definitely have a lot of energy, and we definitely want to tap into that and make sure that everyone is counted, because this is going to impact us for generations to come. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for letting us join. I was going to share my screen. I had a quick presentation to share with y'all too really quick, which y'all already had an awesome one, so I can blaze through this a little bit because we're covering some of the same information. But as Brianna said, me and her are both partnership specialists working with higher ed, specifically in Houston. I know this is a call from all over Texas, so there might be people from some other city that we're not as familiar with, but we can definitely connect you with other partnership specialists in those cities who are possibly also working with higher ed or just with the community in general if we can't help you, just being from Houston. I wanted to run through the timeline again, which y'all already did. So the two things I wanted to touch on was one, that the self-response phase is extended. Previously, the deadline was going to be July 31st. We realized we need more time to get the count done with everything going on. So we're extending it all the way to October 31st. And that's something that is just set in stone. It's actually, I previously thought that, I think I might've said this to you, Lisa, that we needed congressional approval for that date, but that was wrong on my part. That's something that the census can set on our own. So the date is set, October 31st is the deadline. The only thing that did need congressional approval are those dates to send the apportionment to Congress and to deliver the counts to the president. The non-response follow-up is the fancy way of saying census takers are going to come knock on your door, which is what I know most people don't want that happening. So if you respond before August 11th, you have a much, much, much lower chance of anyone coming to bother you. Group quarters, also, as you mentioned, how we count students in person, which I'm going to get to that in a second. We're extending that through September 3rd. And the last one at the bottom there, update leave, which is another thing that I'm not an expert in, because what update leave is rural counties, how we count like the rural areas. And me being from working with Houston, Harris County, there's actually no update leave in Harris County at all. But Texas as a whole, there's a lot of update leave. So we have other partnership specialists who are working with all these rural counties to help really get the message to them, is that we want them to wait to respond until they get their form in the mail. Well, actually not in the mail, because these are places that don't get mail. They're gonna have a census taker come drop the census form off in person, which of course, again, we need more time to do. And again, you touched on this one. Why should you respond to the census? This comes down to really two things: money and power. It's affecting billions of dollars in federal funding, specifically even towards college students that you might not realize. Pell Grant, adult education grants, FAFSA student loans, emergency services, Medicare and Medicaid, getting money to our hospitals, which is so important at a time like this. All this is affected by people simply responding to a 9 or 10 questions on a questionnaire. The next one is power, is that it affects the apportionment of representatives in the House of Representatives. And as you can see from the map, Texas from the 2010 census gained more seats than any other state in the nation. We gained 4 seats, which the next one that came close was actually just 2. And as I'm sure y'all all know, Texas still has some of the fastest growing cities in the nation. So we're on track to gain even more representatives if we get a complete and accurate count. So with students moving around and schools being closed due to COVID-19, I thought it was important to touch on where you should respond. And I'm just going to read this verbatim. This is the guidelines from the Census Bureau. College students should be counted where they usually live, even if they are temporarily staying elsewhere while their school is closed because of COVID-19. So if you've moved somewhere, if you've left the area you normally live to go back and live with parents, to go and live with other family members, live with friends, think about where you would normally be during the year and count yourself at that location. And the reason that's important is, I run underneath that, is an undercount in a college town means that lots of money is lost for that town. So think of something like College Station, where there's like half the population is college students. If half that population leaves because of COVID-19, because of the school shutting down, and then they go back home to another city and they're not counted in College Station, then College Station is going to lose out on billions of dollars, millions to billions of dollars for the next 10 years. And then this is not something that we get to redo. This is not going to happen until 2030. So think about towns like that, and think about it for your town too. If you're leaving the college town that you would normally be in, count yourself at that location. And the second one is, how should you respond? So there's really, the students fall into 2 categories. The first is that student housing. If you live in student housing, you fall under group quarters, you actually don't need to respond to the census, because the Census Bureau is going to be working with the housing administrators there to get you counted through that group quarters process, which a lot we're doing through e-response now, through online. So if you live in dorms, private student housing, and it's important to note that can be on or off campus. If it's like strictly a student housing facility, you don't really need to worry too much about it. But if you live in an off-campus, privately owned apartment or house, that's where you come in. That's where we need you to respond. Get with your roommates, make sure if they counted you, then you're good to go. If they didn't count you, it's okay. You can resubmit another census form and get counted that way. If you normally live with your parents, have them count you, do it for them, whatever it takes. Just count everyone is in your household. And I also wrote that international students count too. Important to note that a lot of people may not be aware that if you're here the majority of the year, then we want you to be counted, and that includes a lot of international students. And I was going to let Brianna go over these last couple slides here. And Brianna, if you wanted to just yell out next slide to me, I can go next for you.
Yeah, sure. And I know we already touched on the response rates, but just to reiterate, Texas is at about 51%, give or take. So we do have some work to do as we compare ourselves to the national self-response. There is some time left, but we don't want people to, forget about the census. We want to keep it top of mind, and we definitely want to move up in the ranks. I believe Texas is number 40 as far as households or people that have responded. So we're definitely working to get higher up on that list. So the map just basically means that 6.2 households have responded. And like Sam mentioned earlier, it's not going to include the update leave where people are having the forms dropped off to their households, because that's not going to start until June. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and I think, Lisa, you had, your data was from 1 day in advance of me, so it looks like we actually did move up from 40 to 39, so yay, we made progress.
Yay. But yeah, we'll definitely be hiring once operations for the 2020 census resume. So the pay is based on counties. You can go online and check the pay for your county. We did some research, and the lowest is $15 an hour in Texas. I believe most Texas counties start at about $18 an hour though. Of course, you can go and find this information on your own. The good thing about our jobs is once you apply, your application stays within the pool. So, once things return back to normal and we can send people out into the field, you don't have to worry about reapplying. It'll already be there. So jobs coming soon. Oh, next slide, I'm sorry. So yeah, how can you help? I know that this is an awesome organization. Texas Rising already does a ton of great things, but we did want to just share some creative ideas that maybe you want to participate in. So share material on social media. It can be as simple as posting a flyer with some educational information and using the hashtag, 2020 census. Each of you are trusted voices and you have influence in your own individual networks. So I just want to let you all know, don't underestimate the influence and the credibility that you could have in your own community. We also have a pretty awesome video challenge going on right now. I believe Texas Rising is already well aware of it and is going to participate. The deadline is this Thursday, May 7th, but it's a super simple challenge. You just need to create an informative video about the census that is creative, and it needs to be at least 30 seconds to, I think, 3 minutes. So I would encourage you all to get involved with that. The grand prize is $30,000 cash. So there is money attached. It could be an easy way to, get some money while you're sitting at home bored. Of course, tell a friend. Like I said again, you all are trusted voices and you have influence. So once you do the census and you see, man, that was easy and it wasn't anything to be intimidated by, maybe you could just tell a friend, hey, did you do your census? It only took me, 5 minutes. Another cool thing that we've been into is virtual events / virtual classrooms. So those can be as creative or formal as a partner would like, but we'd love to attend virtual events. So even if you want to do something on your own, maybe you're doing a happy hour and you want to just say, hey, did everyone do the census? Okay, stop, everybody do the census, put down your drinks, we're going to do the census. That could be a good way to get, people in your community involved and to make the census fun and not something that's scary or complex. Mobile questionnaire assistance. We're hopefully hoping that can roll out possibly in the fall semester. It has been delayed, and basically that means that Sam, myself, and different colleagues, we go out into the community and we have technology for people to respond on the spot. So that's something to look out for. Of course, we can't predict the future, not sure how things are going to turn out. But in the fall, we're hoping that we can go back and attend, those homecoming events and parades and community fairs and, make it that much easier for the community to respond. So those are just some of the ideas, how you can help. We definitely want to keep the energy up within the younger community. You guys are literally the future. So don't feel like the census is intimidating or scary or that you're not important or that you can't get involved. You all are leaders, and just being on this video chat is, you're doing your civic duty. So thank you for that. Next slide. Oh yeah, so questions, anything that you want to ask, feel free. And thank you all again for having us. I definitely enjoyed y'all's presentation. Looks like we have a question. What was the Texas response rate for 2010? Is there a way that Congress can take into account the pandemic's impact on the census to add funds for all the states with lower than normal response rates? I'm not sure that we can see, well, Sam, do you know how to see 2010 response rates? I'm sorry.
There is a way to see it. I don't know the number off the top of my head. But there is a way to see the response rate in 2010. And it's important to know, I cannot remember what the response rate was. It was probably in the 60s or 70s. And two things to keep in mind with that is that one, that we only had paper questionnaires back then. There was no online, there was no phone. And the other thing to keep in mind is just because it was 60 or 70% self-response, that doesn't mean we didn't count 30% of our population. That means that we had to send census takers to 30% of the population and have them be interviewed and have them respond in person. So most of the time we do count everybody with a very small percentage undercount, but even that really small percentage of an undercount can lead to billions of dollars that a state is losing out on.
And I just looked it up on the census and it was about 25 million April 1st, 2010 in Texas. And that's just on the Census Quick Facts website for what it's worth. But I hope that helped. Thank you.
Thank
Hannah.
you.
There's, and I want to touch on, I'm not actually sure about the second portion of your question, Hannah, but I do know that the census, they do have a questionnaire that they're sending out to folks. Maybe y'all could speak more about that. That does ask about the impact that COVID is having in the communities across the state or across the nation. I'm not sure if y'all have more information about that. If you want to touch on that.
Yeah, they're doing, it's a household pulse survey, I believe is the official name of it. And they're sending it out actually over email and phone numbers from whatever they have to a small percentage of the population, just to kind of see how the country's doing at this time. For your the second half of your question though, sorry, I forgot to answer it. It was that can we take into account the pandemic's impact on the census and add funds to states with lower than normal response rates? Well, so I think with our delays is kind of how the census is taking into account the impact, of course. Like we're having to delay so many field operations. Me and Brianna aren't allowed to do anything out in the field until June 1st, which before our job was like everything in the field, and now we're strictly work from home, which everybody is, of course. So that's how we're doing it from a federal standpoint. As in terms of adding funds to states with lower response rates, that's really up to the states. It's not something we can influence. There's some states that are putting federal funding into census efforts. Texas isn't one of them, unfortunately. But at the same time, if you look at a lot of the cities, like we're from Houston, the city of Houston and Harris County have been huge advocates of the census. They put a couple $1 million into census outreach, and I know there's other cities in Texas that have done the same.
Do we have any other questions for them?
And I just want to reiterate that responses to the census are safe. They're not shared with any other government agencies or entities. So you don't have to worry, or your families don't have to worry about ICE, leasing manager, even if they receive, government benefits. We don't share these responses, and it really is a hard penalty against Sam and I if we were to go against that. It really is a statistical process, the census, in order to allocate that money and the power. So we just want to, we understand the fear, and your responses really are protected.
So there's a question here from Rick, and he asked if a parent submitted the census for their household and included their college student as living with them, even though they normally live outside of the household for college, how can the student ensure they're not counted twice when filling out their census?
Okay, that's a really good question, Rick. So don't worry if your parent counted you. If you normally live, like I was mentioning, like there's the student housing kids, and then there's the kids who live in apartments or houses. If you're normally one of those student housing people, just kind of don't worry about it. The census has ways in place to make sure duplication isn't an issue. And if you are one of those kids who normally live in a private apartment or house with roommates, go ahead and submit a form. Even if your parents already counted you, we want to make sure you're counted in the right place. So go ahead and submit a form. The census, I'm not sure even how they do it. They have some behind the scenes magic to make sure duplication isn't taking place. So they'll kind of take care of it behind the scenes. But go ahead and submit a form if you're one of those students who normally lives in like an off-campus private apartment or house.
And we do quality control checks. So that's another way we catch those duplications. So a person may receive a phone call or something like that to follow up if we notice that, hey, Jim has been counted at, Texas A&M, but he's still being counted in Oklahoma by his mom or something like that.
Okay, we have time for about one more question, if folks have one. In case we're waiting. in case we're waiting for another one. I do want to ask though, so for students who might want to get into contact with people who are like partnership specialists like you all in their regions, like how can they do that? Is there a number to call, or is there a link on the census website?
There is, it's kind of difficult. We're kind of hard to track down some of the times. Most of the time they put it on us to contact these organizations in a
I know,
way.
because I reached out to you and I was
Yeah.
like, how did you find me?
And there is I think there actually is a partnership email on the census.gov website that partners have contacted. I've gotten a few emails sent to me from people emailing them, and then they forward it to me. But I'd say for y'all, since like we can give y'all our email, it'd be best just to go straight to us, and we can hopefully get y'all in contact with the right person, especially if you live in Houston. We know all the Houston people. We can really help y'all out. If not, I can send it up to like my coordinator, and then they can send it to a coordinator of Dallas or a coordinator of Austin or any of the rural areas around Texas. And then a partnership specialist can help you out through there if we can't already be the ones to help y'all.
Cool. So we have 2 more minutes, but 1 more minute. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the next portion. Again, I want to thank Brianna and Sam for hopping on this call today. Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much. And that was actually very, very helpful. But there's information I didn't even know, and I've been like looking for so long. So thank you. Again, for students who have more questions, feel free to reach out to them or myself, and we can get back to you and answer it the best way we know how. So for events that are coming up in relation to census for this week, since the census outreach is going to be 2 weeks, for this first week, we're going to do a best practices phone bank training. So the Census Bureau has actually allowed folks and partners to help residents fill out the census over the phone, which is a new thing they're doing. And so we want to make sure that when we do that training, that folks know the best ways to do that, and they also can do it, just ensure people's confidentiality and privacy. And we're going to just be going through the steps of what that looks like, and that will be tomorrow from 3 to 4. And then on Wednesday, we'll have a text bank, just again, asking peers, asking them if they filled out their census, directing them to the 2020 census.gov website to do so, and then asking if they want to volunteer with us and what those next steps look like. And then the second text bank this week will be Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then we'll have next week, it'll be a whole array of digital activities and challenges. I know Brianna and Sam touched on a lot of the ways you can do things online, since it's where most of us are now. So some of those ideas that we have will be like Me Mondays, where folks can y'all are creative. I've seen the work y'all do. So Me Mondays, just to kind of like amplify funny, interesting, creative ways to kind of get the census information out there. Making TikToks, we'll have like Instagram filters and stickers for you all. Just really engaging in fun ways. Because again, like Brianna said, like census, I mean, it's not a sexy topic, let's just be real, but it's important and we can make it fun. So yeah, that'll be exciting. We'll be giving more information, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, on the resources that we talked about in this training, and also any volunteer opportunities that are coming up. Does anyone have any questions about anything? You can feel free to unmute yourself if you're not a fast typer. You know. Okay, well, that's all I have. I can hand it over to Asmata or Ray, or we can go ahead and end the call real quick. Oh, did you want to take a picture, or was that Asmata?
I can take the picture if people want to turn their cameras on. It's gonna be 2 pictures, just giving y'all a heads up because we have quite a bit of people here online today. Okay.
Cute staff.
I'm gonna do the second one. Okay. Okay, 1, 2, cheese. That's it. That's all I have. Hey, Lisa, by any chance, do you have the forms for the text banks and the phone bank training? And would you like to drop those in the chat box for folks to sign up?
Yes, let me go ahead and do that right now. Thank you. Also, I just really want to thank everyone for hopping on. And yeah, just being awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone's weeks are going great. Let's see. I wonder how I can do it. Actually, here it is. Okay, I'm dropping the volunteer form in the chat right now for folks. If it doesn't work, let me know on Slack and I can go ahead and fix that for y'all. But again, thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great Monday. Stay awesome, stay cool, drink waters, get hydrated, take a walk outside. But yeah, thank y'all. I'll see y'all later.
Thank you for being here. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.